Hello gameologists and welcome to Top 10, the show where we look at the most memorable and highly rated moments related to gaming. There is no more make or break moment in a game's success than the launch. Launching a game is a balancing act between a developer's publisher, producers, and worst of all, their audience. Bring out a game too soon and you risk being underprepared. Delay a game's release and you build either frustration or hype, both of which put weight on the reception of a release. Plenty of games have released to a meat grinder, being torn limb from limb by the public, never to be played again. But some games have experienced this, and in the wake of their total obliteration, slowly rose back up, taping their limbs back on, and eventually becoming games that were not only good, but games that were great. Today we are counting down the top 10 worst launches for great games. Don't forget to give us your top 10 in the comments and suggest ideas for future lists. Number 10, Minecraft. Minecraft hits our number 10 spot as it's a point of contention for games with bad launches. To say that it had a bad launch is not necessarily accurate. The best way to describe its launch would be meh. The reason it makes this list is because, like every other entry, it became so much better and is arguably the most currently popular game on our list for both content creators, gamers, and pop culture in general. Minecraft began as a test game called Cave Game, which was developed in less than a week. It shared the same aesthetic as Minecraft, but had only grass and cobblestone blocks. When Minecraft released publicly in 2009, the game was able to receive comments for improvements, including the addition of mobs, multiplayer, hills and terrain, and of course, survival mode. The first alpha version available for sale released that year on June 13th, 2009. In 1 month, there were only 1,000 copies sold and 20,000 accounts registered. Skip ahead 2 years later to the year 2011, where they hit 1 million registered accounts. But this was only the beginning of the snowball effect, because in only 6 months, they moved to 10 million registered accounts. Minecraft is a beast that started from basically nothing, and that's why it ended up here on our list. Number 9, Fortnite. Fortnite, much like Minecraft, didn't have a rough launch in the way that people hated it, but rather that nobody really cared. It had a sizable download count and a community of people who were having fun with it, but in its infancy it was just another co-op sandbox base building game with waves of AI enemies that was destined to fall into obscurity shortly after launch. Again, the game was fun and built very well, but it just wasn't anything special. Even after it introduced Battle Royale mode and begun taking shape as the game it is known as today, it was then facing a new wave of backlash from gamers and being labeled as simply a rip-off of PUBG. Nobody expected it to eventually steal the Battle Royale crown and surpass PUBG to become possibly the most played game on the planet. But it did, and it did it quickly. It faced a wave of publicity hits from parents concerned with its addictive qualities and gamers who simply hated it for what it had become. As it grew in popularity, it definitely grew in haters as well. But as you'll see a lot on this list, the devs didn't take their money and run. They didn't become complacent. Instead, they put their heads down, got to work, and continued to build Fortnite into the absolute juggernaut we know it as today. Maybe if the PUBG devs had used a little more elbow grease at the time, they could have held on to their crown. I'm just saying. Minecraft and Fortnite would both have rated higher on our list because of the games that they became, but neither received as much hate from their launch as the rest of our entries. Here we go. Number 8, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, we've rolled our eyes at game developers defending their game's terrible launches many times in the past, but no more collective eye-rolling has ever taken place than with Star Wars Battlefront 2. In fact, the worldwide mutual eye-rolling was so intense that in 2020, a comment made by EA on Reddit responding to the backlash made it into the Guinness Book of World Records for the most downvoted comment of all time. Ouch. This game was a mess of hate from a community who really wanted to enjoy it. The terrible progression system balanced with the awful implementation of loot boxes got so bad that even gambling commissions and the government had to step in to assess what was going on. After so many awful PR decisions, we were surprised to see EA totally revamp the greedy loot box system and continue to update the game with free content and expansions. It took about a year post-launch for the game to represent more of what it should have been from day one. The Clone Wars update introduced more fan-favorite characters, and the progression system was finally good. We would rank this one higher again, but after the game peaked at the end of 2019, it took a massive hit during the pandemic, and is still fighting to this day. Number 7, Rainbow Six Siege. Boring, boring, boring. That's what people were saying about Rainbow Six Siege in 2015 when the game was released. Originally receiving criticism for being a multiplayer-only game that featured no single-player campaign, tensions were already pretty high. And when the game launched, it drew heavy criticism for featuring barely any content. Players wanted two things: more maps and more operators. Some wanted more modes as well, but I've already committed to this two-thing system. So they wanted maps and operators. If there's one thing you learn from today's video, let it be this: if a game starts bad and raises in quality, it can almost always be credited to one thing: developers putting their heads down and getting to work. Rainbow Six Siege connected with their community and created data sets that would allow them to add content the players actually wanted. They implemented a huge roster of playable operators and turned a game that was expected to be quickly forgotten into one of the best tactical competitive shooters gamers can buy today. Number 6, Destiny.
That wizard came from the moon.
Destiny. Such a cool concept, squandered by promised content not available on release, incredibly hindered character progression, and not to forget, disgustingly dull and lazy voice work performed by what we can only assume was a very sleepy Peter Dinklage. A week into the game's release, the highly anticipated raid dropped, and it was crushingly difficult, taking the first group to ever beat it 10 plus hours and 1,600 deaths. Items and high-level gear that are second nature today were almost impossible to come by, and the multiplayer that promised a full world just made the product we received on day one feel more empty. The alternative from multiplayer, being the first collection of story missions, was so disjointed and incoherent that most reviewers gave the game between 5 and 6 out of 10. But after 4 DLCs and the recasting and re-recording of Nolan North as Peter Dinklage's ghost, the game upon launch and the game players were enjoying 2 years later were barely comparable. It wasn't until the Taken King expansion that the game was finally considered great. More content was added and some of the more convoluted game systems were simplified and overhauled, XP leveling and light leveling being the main complaint and the biggest fix. It was later revealed that a year before release, the game had to scrap a lot of what it was originally planning and what would eventually be in the game due to time restraints. Honestly, developers, just delay the game so they can be ready. Unless it's something that we really want, and then if you delay it, we will destroy you. Number 5, Diablo 3. I know, Diablo 3 is a beast. That's why it's pretty easy to forget that in terms of the most disappointing launches in video game history, Diablo 3 has one of the worst. This game was gonna be a big one, and it was long anticipated, but the reception from fans towards Blizzard got off to a pretty rocky start right from the get-go thanks to its always online DRM, or digital rights management, which required players to be connected to the game's servers even when they were just playing the story mode. Players who were just looking to play the game offline were left high and dry, as this wasn't allowed. Due to the server quality and the high demand from players, most gamers weren't even able to log on. No log on meant no game, and this persisted non-stop for weeks. And let's not forget the stupidest move of all: the auction house. An auction house is a necessary feature in any online RPG, but in Diablo's auction house, players were able to use real-world money to buy high-level gear, essentially ruining the game's economy in just moments. 1 year later, in the first expansion, Reaper of Souls was released. Reaper of Souls added replayability to the game with more content and more features. They got rid of the auction house in favor of nothing, because nothing is literally better than the auction house, and they introduced new classes and their servers finally worked. Number 4, Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy is one of the most beloved series of all time. There isn't a gamer alive who doesn't at least know the name. Square Enix has made game after game in the series, some with better receptions than others, but all undeniably enjoyed by their fanbase. That was until 2010 when Final Fantasy XIV released, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that would take all of the beloved lore and aesthetics of the Final Fantasy world and put it into an online setting. Oh, except they totally botched it. Upon release, and for lack of a better word, Final Fantasy XIV sucked. The game took an unbelievably beefy PC to run, and it featured heaps of quality of life issues. It was laggy and it crashed a lot, and we mean a lot. Leveling was upsettingly difficult as the game became known as one of the hardest grind fests available for MMORPG fans, and the game was not really finished on release. It had barely any content like dungeons, and some of the most famous classes like white mages were not even featured in the game. The map was uninspired and felt like it was totally randomly generated. It was huge, but it was lazy. The game was a complete and utter failure, and it was destined to be a black mark on the history of a company who'd up until this point released globally enjoyed masterpieces. Enter Naoki Yoshida, the man who would essentially rebuild the game from the ground up and fix the abomination that was Final Fantasy XIV. 3 years later, they officially released Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Now look, as a narrator, I know I should stay objective, but I actually bought this on release day and was absolutely blown away by what the game had become. It was incredible. Okay, back to narrator mode. The leveling system was rehauled, countless quality of life improvements were made, it was ported to consoles, and the game was saved. Even today in 2022, Final Fantasy XIV is still one of the biggest MMOs on the planet, with millions of people logging on daily. With a very reasonable price tag and a very positive Steam rating, there's no better time to play Final Fantasy XIV. Number 3, GTA 5 Online. On the 17th of September, GTA 5 launched, with GTA Online expecting to launch 2 weeks later on October 1st. Now, Rockstar wanted GTA Online to feel like its own game, even though it came free with GTA 5. Unfortunately, giving everybody time to beat the main game and then lining up to start playing online at the same time creates one pretty substantial problem. Everyone is then lining up to start playing online at the same time. With millions of people trying to play and Rockstar self-admittedly being unprepared for the level of players GTA 5 would reach, the launch was a mess. Players' characters were being deleted left, right, and center. People reported spending hours, sometimes days, just waiting in the launch lobby. And those who were able to load in found themselves being kicked when the game glitched out. With a very limited collection of missions that players found themselves having to grind to be able to afford an apartment, many felt salt was rubbed into the wound when their progress and money were reset or deleted entirely. The launch was so abysmal that Rockstar disabled the purchase of in-game shark cards so players weren't wasting their money. With heists not launching till March the following year, GTA Online was blasted online and declared, like many others on this list, dead on arrival. But almost a decade later, and GTA Online has millions of players enjoying their time in San Andreas every single month. With an endless amount of game modes and options for players, GTA Online went from being a permanent stain on the reputation of Rockstar to one of the most enjoyable online experiences a gamer can have even today. In an almost poetic rise from the ashes, Rockstar's original vision to have GTA Online feel like its own game was well and truly achieved, with the online version now available cheaper than GTA 5 as a separate standalone game. Number 2, Cyberpunk 2077. Uh-oh, here's a big one. Cyberpunk was bad. There's no denying it. Upon release and for the subsequent few months following, it was pretty rotten. The game received generally positive reviews from critics, but the user reviews, whoo boy, they were not happy. The game featured heaps of bugs and game-breaking glitches, constant crashes, awful textures, disappointing story variety, and a generally unfavorable reception to the highly anticipated character Johnny Silverhand, played by the much-loved Keanu Reeves. The only thing that reviewers and players agreed on, really, was that the game was released unfinished. A cardinal sin in the world of gaming. Less than a week after release, developer CD Projekt Red issued an apology statement and shockingly admitted to their failures by issuing refunds to console physical copies. Sony removed the game from the PlayStation Store and offered full refunds to those who purchased it from their store. The unbelievable levels of hype surrounding this game didn't help the reception, and Cyberpunk was released as one of the biggest disappointments gamers had experienced in a long time. The interesting thing about Cyberpunk today is that it never really had many gameplay tweaks. The additions were minimal, which brought to life the fact that the bones were always good. It just needed a little plastic surgery to tighten things up. Reviewers and journalists began to take a new turn, turning the game's failures onto the consumers rather than the companies. Whether or not you agree with this, it's worth noting, as with the recent Edge Runner update, Cyberpunk 2077 is being seen now for what it is, instead of being seen as what gamers expected or were led to believe by an overhyped marketing plan. It's an action RPG with a rich story and just generally fun gameplay. CD Projekt Red has fixed the bugs and texture issues and massively improved the performance on consoles, including the free upgrade to the current generation. It has since moved to the top 10 sellers on Steam and sits at a mostly positive rating, a pipe dream from the original user reviews. Before we get to our number one disappointing launch, here are some honorable mentions. Assassin's Creed Unity, Halo Master Chief Collection, Fallout 76, Elder Scrolls Online, Tom Clancy's The Division, Fallout New Vegas, and Batman Arkham Knight. Number 1, No Man's Sky. When we all saw the trailer for No Man's Sky back in 2014, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. The whole gaming world had their ears and eyes attached to every interview and every word coming out of Hello Games founder Sean Murray's mouth. An endlessly procedurally generated universe that you could explore freely and live within. Endless opportunity and biomes that would make each world feel unique and worth exploring. Did you want to build a civilization on a single planet, or explore the galaxy and become a bounty hunter? Well, you can't do any of that stuff because the game released as an empty, boring shell of what was promised. Here is a quick list of lies that were told. The E3 demo was randomly generated and not planned. Lie! The game would have realistic solar system physics. Lie! Ship variation would be complex and epic. Lie! General gameplay features like landing on comets, fighting and destroying freighters, epic space battles would all be in lies! And finally, and possibly the most egregious lie of all, the game would be multiplayer and have absolutely no NPCs. Lie. The game was none of these things, and the media storm hit Hello Games hard. Sean Murray was dragged across the coals by everyone that felt wronged by him, and Hello Games and No Man's Sky were finished. But then, Sean and Hello Games did the most amazing thing of all. The same thing that everybody on this list ended up doing. They kept working. They rerouted all complaints to Sean and created a data list of complaints based on user experiences, hours played versus complaints from non-players, etc. They used this now formed data to make a priority list of additions and fixes that the game needed, and they put their heads down and got to work. They stopped talking to the press and kept all communication strictly to the community. 100 days later, and they introduced the Frontier update, which featured a bunch of bug fixes and base building gameplay. A few months after that came No Man's Sky Next, the biggest update of all. Next introduced more in-depth crafting and building, an overhaul to the entire market system, map updates and third person, better planets and universe randomization, but quite possibly the biggest improvement of all, multiplayer. No Man's Sky became the 6th top-selling console game for that month, moved into Steam's top 10, the Steam reviews moved from mixed to very positive, and today, 91% of Google users like this game. No Man's Sky was saved. Did you enjoy that video? Don't forget to like it and let us know in the comments what your list is. Make sure you are subscribed to Gameology here on YouTube, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook for more great content.